The reason all my kids.
Hi, this is staff meeting January 5th, 2023. As Martin has chided me, I've lost track of the episode number, so I have to go back and spend 20 minutes on that or half an hour on that soon. I'm also behind again, like God knows how many fucking videos. So I'll try to get to that today. So how are you guys? We good? So one of the things interesting, there's really not a lot going on in the world to discuss current events and how they apply to us. But we do have a topic today that was from that Luke had brought up, and I'm hoping that if I give him time to warm up, he'll introduce the topic because I probably can't. So that's what we're going to try to discuss today. Otherwise, I don't have too much that I can pull out of the air.
Oh, okay, I'll have to.
Okay. I like to make up jobs for Martin, like fictitious employment, and they're all seedy. All seedy business occupations that he must be involved in when he gentlemanly excuses himself to go off to handle something or another.
That's
and Martin isn't a very seedy person, which is why it works. I could accuse Brandon of being seedy, and he'd just ignore it and go along with it and say that would be fine.
I can't help what my descendants have done.
You can't what?
I can't help what my descendants have done.
Your descendants or your ancestors?
My ancestors, excuse me. I can't help who I'm descendant from. That's the phrasing that I wanted.
I don't know, between mine and Luke's, we've probably conquered half the fucking planet. So we've got plenty, at least I know my family has plenty of suits. I was talking to Brad because I was pretty sure we're distantly related, and it turns out to be true. Because they're from New England. They're all New England too. But he did keep track of it, so it's interesting to see him go over it. Anyway, so Luke, I'm sorry, I'm stalling here. What is the topic that you said that you would bring up?
Well, we were talking the other day about what's actually being produced by our environment, and there's a thread that we've been chasing for a while now that's basically, it appears to be that the environment is producing feminine behavior.
Yes.
And my pushback on that, or my counter to that, is that it's actually an environment that's producing childish behavior.
Correct.
Not specifically feminine behavior. So what we're seeing, all the measures that we're seing, all the effects of that we're seeing, what we're calling feminine behavior, a lot of that is really just childish behavior. And because I don't know that we have an accurate baseline to measure from at the moment. We don't even know what, I don't know, natural feminine behavior looks like right now, because all we can see is the feminine behavior that's being produced by the environment.
All we can see is the
childish, the childish behavior. Yeah, the childish behavior.
And there's a closer proximity to, feminine.
What I'm looking at, I don't know. Are you guys familiar with the airplane bullet hole thing from World War II?
Yeah.
The statistical research group, the Abraham Wald or whatever the guy's name was.
Cover it so the audience knows how you brought it up.
Yeah. So World War II, right? They were trying to figure out how do we reinforce the bombers, because they keep getting shot down, right? So they actually went out and measured where all the bullet holes were on the planes that came back, right? So they started making a map of all the bullet holes across all the planes that would come back on the missions. And so they were like, okay, these are where they're getting shot up, so these are what we need to reinforce. Well, this guy comes along and goes, well, actually, these are all the planes that made it back. So the planes can survive being shot in all these places. It's all the places that we don't see bullet holes where we need to reinforce, because those are the planes that aren't making it back.
Yeah.
Right. So what he's doing there is he's not just looking at the data, but he's looking at the shape of the data, is the way it fits in my mind. Right. So what is the shape of the data telling him, not just what is the data telling him?
Full accounting.
Right. Exactly. And that's where all this comes
account
from.
for the seen and unseen.
Right. Exactly. And you know, we using that same exercise, we can take a look at a lot of different things. You know, like one of the examples I've used in the past with people is you look at, you know, what is considered to be the world's oldest profession. Right. It's prostitution, right? I mean, that's what people consider, or what's commonly accepted as the world's oldest profession, right? But what does that tell us? What is that being the case tell us about what existed in the time period of the day? It means that women were safe enough to from this is all relative, right? But they were safe enough from rape where charging people money for sex was a viable option, right? So we can learn some things about the conditions of the time by things like that, you know, being in observable, or at least being sticky enough for us to know about them now. And it also tells us that it was widespread enough for it to survive being known now, right? So things like that can emerge from looking at the shape of the data rather than just the data itself, you know, from the full accounting of the data. So that's kind of, I try to keep that in mind whenever I'm looking at any of the things that we're talking about, right? It's like we can read what the data is telling us. We can also read what the gaps in the data is telling us, or what the shape of the data is telling us, right? And all of that is part of that full accounting, I think. And that's all I'm doing with the childishness stuff here. Is, you know, the thing that I wrote the other day was that I observed that the environment that women have been living in for generations and produces what we've been calling feminine behavior is doing the same thing to men as men are being exposed to that environment.
So that's the insight. Can you remember that for a second?
Remember that.
Remember that concept that it's what we're seeing is both sexes are infantilizing, but we are seeing more female when that happens, which means more infantilized. I want to discuss that topic because I think that's okay. Before I go to that, which I'm hoping you will remember to come back to this topic, because it's like, which topic do I lose train of thought on?
Right.
Is that when I listen to you and I listen to your writing or read your writing, and you're trying to say to people in colloquial terms, but I'm going to formalize what you're really doing, which is quite sophisticated. You're always looking for a full accounting and a balanced equation.
Yes.
Right. And so this in economics, we call this the one lesson of economics is accounting for seen and unseen. In other words, this is where most people go wrong in almost everything, is they don't account for both the seen and unseen, or the positiva and negativa, or the masculine and feminine, right? Whenever they're making a decision, an assertion about some general principle, they're hypothesizing only from a subset of the information, which, as you gave example of the bullet holes, they will generalize into the opposite answer because they've actually only worked with half the data, which is only going to serve to confirm when the whole thing is, what we teach is a full accounting. We call it enumeration. We have a lot of names for it, a full accounting. And we look for a balanced equation, which is what's the positive and negative of this. And if you do that, you end up writing like Luke does, which is these extraordinarily pithy is the wrong word, parsimonious formula that condense great amount of information in a very clear statement. To something that is, it can be read, but it's meant to be contemplated, right? It's not because it needs to be understood. And so I just want to clarify because when I'm listening to you say that, and I'm like, yeah, they're not going to get how sophisticated that statement is you're making. And so I want to understand that Luke's applying the method, which is technically what we would call this disambiguation by serialization into a system of measurement that constitutes a full accounting consisting of a balanced equation between that forms an equilibrium that allows us to test whether we're doing the full accounting. Right? It's a very rigorous thing he's doing. So you can
Thinking.
What?
Thinking is
He's
rigorous.
thinking, sorry, he's
rigorous
thinking.
thing.
A very sophisticated way of thinking. If you studied economics and you studied probability, you would be taught these two lessons. Unfortunately, many people who get a class in probability don't understand probability, and so they quote probabilities without understanding this principle. Unfortunately, people take classes in economics, right, without understanding this principle, right? And I would argue that the problem with the behavioral science, of course, is the failure to obey this principle. All right. So now that I've done my job of tying it back to the logics, let's pick up with Luke and have you restate the observation so that we can science it a bit.
Sure.
Did I do okay there? I was
no, that's absolutely accurate, and you're describing what's going on here really well. I am, when I write and when I'm talking in front of audience and stuff like that, I do try to, I don't know, couch my language a bit,
simplificate and add lightness.
Yeah, if I can, right? So I mean, and some of that's just so it's accessible, right? I mean,
Yeah,
just
sure.
so that it's communicable, and I don't have to spend 30 minutes describing each section of the concept. I could just jump right into the concept, right?
I like to do that, and then the people all leave, and then I don't have anything to
right.
do.
Yeah, well, that'd be my preference, but I've found out that my preference destroys audiences rather than
Yes,
rather than attracts them. So this is the lessons I've had to learn. So no, so the observation that I was making was that the environment that we've been living in for generations, right? That what at least in the West, there's some places in the world where this isn't the case, but largely in the West and mostly in the East, right? It's this big metaculture. It produces what we've been calling feminine behavior, but that environment is doing the exact same thing to men as they're exposed to that environment. The longer they're exposed to that environment, they're producing the same infantilization as they did to women. So what I've observed is that women, just because of the way the technology of culture has gone, women have been immersed in that environment far longer than men have, without the pressure of nature being applied to them directly, right? Whereas men have had some vestiges of nature's pressure being applied to them. But now that those are, gaining distance, we're losing contact with nature for men as well, and they're more and more submerged in this environment. They're expressing the same dysfunctions. They're expressing the same kinds of behaviors, and it looks much more childish to me than it looks feminine.
Okay, I want to agree, half, 3/4, no more than 80% agree with you.
That's more than I usually get, so I'll take it.
Well, as you mean it is correct, but what is the effect? What is the given male antisocial behavior, childish, and female childish antisocial behavior? What conditions favor the spread of each? In other words, in an area, a region of high danger or disorder, it favors the male. In other words, if you're in Somalia, right, or whatever, but if you're still in a period of order, it favors the female antisocial behavior. So I'm agreeing they're both infantilizing, but I'm questioning whether, I'm not saying I'm right, I'm asking. I'm questioning whether the influence of the masculine or feminine immaturity is dependent upon what I would call order, or safety or security of the situation. So my view where people feel very safe, and so it's easier to express the feminine. Look what the fuck happened to France. You took a German culture and turned it into people is talking about in affected language. I mean, French used to be a German language, right? A Latinized German language. But where do you think shared turned into chaise? Right? I mean, that modification happened happened by the effeminization of affectation. And this is a long period in French history where this happened, with the feminization of the aristocracy, which you can see with all the doily shit and whatever going on. It's a court language, right? So that happened. But then there's periods of masculinization. We see it in fashion. One of the reasons I was back when I cared about this shit. I said, yeah, I remember when this one particular famous clothing company came out with a particular line, and I said, should have come out with this 2 years ago, because in 2000 and coming into 2008, no one's going to tolerate dressing like this, because people do not dress that way when they feel fearful. And so you can tell what colors are going to sell by the direction economies are going if there's a prediction of the economy. Does that make sense? You can tell what hairstyles will change because people manifest their security or insecurity aesthetically as well. So, if you say a society is becoming frightened, it will masculinize. If a society is becoming unhealthily wealthy, to the point where people can demonstrate status by irresponsibility, then it will become feminized.
Disordered.
It's actually disorder, because order isn't an infinite thing, right? It's an equilibrium. And so I want to run that by you and see if that makes sense. What it falls into is the hard times make strong men, that sequence, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the cyclical version of it. And I'm watching your face, and I don't think you're agreeing with me.
Well, I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, okay.
I'm under no, I'm not making any argument that men and women are the same, or that they express the same types of behaviors. That's not what I'm getting at here. The reason the observation came up is because we often claim that irresponsibility is inherently feminine, and I disagree with that claim. I don't think the human species survives irresponsibility if it's inherent to any part of the human species.
Correct.
So that's a dysfunction that emerges because of this infantilization.
We're trying to parse. There's innocence, immaturity, immorality, and then there's antisocial behavior that's both either masculine or feminine. So we're running into two things that are overlapping. So take a second. What we're witnessing, because we stifle men's antisocial behavior, meaning we don't afford for equilibrative violence, because you can be violent pro-socially.
Yes.
We don't afford for that. So men use legal antisocial feminine behavior better than women do. And we disrupt things using feminine behavior all the time.
Yeah.
Females who slip into antisocial behavior because it's their pattern of being, some of them are immature. Meaning they're just being women in the wrong place, and they actually don't know, and they need discipline. That requires what we're affording for, setting limits.
Does this bother you? This thing that I don't like the end result being some percentage of men have to be the fucking adults in the room. Does that, you know what I mean? Does that bother you the way I mean, I'm trying to figure out why that bothers me. And I want to get back to the response.
Because you're one of those men.
What?
Because you're one of them.
Such an asshole.
You're demonstrating what Luke was saying, that everyone tries to avoid responsibility.
Well, he's right. Let's start with, we all seek to avoid responsibility. Conversely, males tend to seek status through responsibility. Females try to seek status through evading responsibility. In other words, through wealth. Right? They want to consume. That's why they look for men who have wealth. So I want to say, God, you guys beat me up with this, avoiding responsibility. I'm evading. Now, what does this really mean? They're concentrating their responsibility in themselves and their children if they have them, maybe their family. Men try to concentrate political responsibility or responsibility for others in themselves, right? And so this is just another one of those one of those equilibrating functions. And so going back to Luke's point, they're both being infantilized. The economic condition is one where the economic and strategic condition is one of excess security, and we see this destroys civilizations. I mean, the most common one is the French court. The second most common one is the Spanish people, because of their getting gold out of the New World. And the current one is America's ability to use the dollar to create a false economy and debt expansion, create a false economy, and the offshoring of labor. So I wanted to go, and then the response. Well, it says 3 points, and then in the context of that, we say, well, how do I demonstrate status? Well, if I'm in a scarce environment, right, then I can demonstrate status through productivity. If I'm a frightening environment, I can do it through order, creation, of force, power. If we're an expansionary environment, I can do it under politics. But the women are always trying to do it through consumption, or they're trying to do it through undermining. And so what I'm left back here with is, it's about responsibility, and we are able to afford for a short term responsibility evasion that ends up in making soft people, right? I mean, that's the end of the cycle. Okay, did I make sense there with the three different axes I tried to illustrate?
The feminine express power as control, and we express it masculine as discipline.
The discipline. All right. So what I want
one of the other elements that comes into play here, though, that's looped into this, at least for me, is that what we're calling, we're measuring from the perspective of the woman. And one of the arguments I make is that male and female, neither one of us is actually a fully mature, fully integrated human until we are responsible for others, until we have the kids, or we are running the company that impacts somebody else's survival.
Yep.
Right. So we're measuring people that are immature and calling that the standard for the gender. So all of the things you described were true, but they're true of an immature female, not a mature female.
Oh,
just
correct.
Like the same thing's true of mature and immature males.
Did I come off? What I tried to do was add precision to your correct observation.
Well, I know, but that distinction wasn't in place when we were going through that.
Okay. Because
that's what I mean about finding the right baseline. Is the stuff that you're describing, is that the accurate baseline for women, or should we be using the baseline as the mother, not the woman, as the baseline for what we're seeing as the idea?
That's such a good point, Luke. Thank you for finally getting there.
Because when we look at men, that's what we're describing. Men in the position of authority is the father. It's not the man that's in the position of authority. It's
Luke
the
is
father.
saying mother and father is the baseline.
Yes.
And move up from there, and below there's not competence.
Right. That's a really good clarification. And I definitely make that mistake. Is that I'm trying to I want everybody, it's just typical, we all make mistakes. I'm just like everybody else. So what I do is I tend to say the standard of behavior is the responsibility necessary for preserving the intergenerational transfer of capital, right? And and so I view, like I say, the problem is a third of women, half of men get there and 20% of women get there, whatever. I don't know the actual number, right? A pretty substantial proportion of men achieve adulthood, right? They may not achieve competency beyond at a very high scale, but they'll achieve adulthood. Right? A smaller proportion of women do, but what you see with women do is that they once they have children, the more children they have, the closer they approach to being the same responsibility as the male.
Right.
And so so I was subconsciously holding that frame and then calling all the female intuition, right, as the infant is infantilized, is what you're saying. Immature. What's the word you would use? Immature.
Yeah, both they're interchangeable at this point.
All right. Jesus, that was really good. So how does that affect?
Well, to me, what it does is it makes the destruction of the family so much of a greater violation, because it undermines our ability to fully integrate our humanity. We can't become fully developed, fully adult humans without that extension of responsibility beyond ourselves.
Okay.
And that's the evolved way of extending that responsibility beyond ourselves. Right. We've got a lot of proxies for it now in our society. And we've got more proxies for men than we do for women to scale that and to replace that pressure. But that's the evolved pressure.
But don't you see the female infantilization? I think I know where you're going to go here, but I got to try it anyway. Don't you see the female infantilization as causing the male infantilization?
No.
Or do you? Yeah, I didn't think so. I look at the education system and the propaganda system and the voting, and that's what I see. Is I see women using numbers, given new empowerment, and our failure to constrain their antisocial behavior.
I think the female infantilization is being allowed to steer the male infantilization, but it's not the cause. The dependence is the cause of it.
Dependence.
Yeah, you can't extend a responsibility you don't have. So the more dependent you are, the less even opportunity for the extension of responsibility you have.
Okay, so this goes to one of the common things I have to sort of work on when I love working with you on this, is that I'm trying to solve the political legal problem.
Right.
And so I tend to look at the world from that top down, whereas you're looking at it from the bottom up, and wherever those two seem to be off, it seems to find a wonderful opportunity for insight. So what am I seeing here? I still feel like we're missing something. So why did men let women do this? That's the wrong question, isn't it? Why did men fall down? I don't know if they did. Because if you look at the data, men didn't fall down. All this activism is created by women, right? And women in the academy, right?
It's created by the antisocial feminine. Because there are men driving some of these movements.
And all these social changes that came about in the last century, most of the people, men and women, were always against them. They happened anyway, because elites don't care.
So the way it looks to me, and this is part of just the way that I've structured the whole frame on this, is we create,
because you're telling people you can take responsibility back, and I'm saying the system victimizes them because they don't have the equivalent of a philosophy or religion, which is what you're providing as the philosophy, to resist their destruction.
They're correct in that the institutions are oppressing them, they're harming them, because the institutions, while they are ours, they are being used to teach these people that they are oppressed, not steward them through hardship. Institutions are to help your people, not to harm them and hold them down.
Well, but
at the same time, the institutions have to do that because we erect these institutions to accommodate for a need. So if the whole population is saying, I have a need, I have a need, I have a need, then the institution has to adjust itself to accommodate for that need. And so we've created this vicious cycle where we've created a dependent population, and then all of our institutions are responding to that dependent population by expanding their meeting of the needs of those dependencies. And it keeps cycling through and getting worse. It's the exact opposite of that, hard times, good men.
Decapitalization of responsibility.
Yeah. But I mean, it started out, in my mind, it makes complete sense because it's a natural instinct to want to create as safe an environment for your offspring and their caretakers as possible.
Yeah, can I push back a little bit? I don't.
Sure.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm testing.
Yeah, no, that's why I brought it up.
I am, you are, we are, right? The kind of men who look at the world and make choices. What percent of the population can make those choices without the institutions basically programming them to make those choices?
Almost none.
Well, I don't, we're conservative minded people, so we're going to be extremely pessimistic about that, right?
Do the personality stack overlap? High IQ, high openness, disagreeable, systemizing. How many do you need to stack before the numbers get small?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always go back to why do Christians get good at this? They make me fucking crazy when they argue with me, but they're really fucking good at this shit. Like the personal, right? The personal and social.
I think there's a correlation between right personality traits and being a Christian. Anyway.
Well, we just know that we thought that, but it turns out it's more a function of indoctrination. In other words, while there's two factors at play, it appears that religion largely is a function of indoctrination. There is a segment of the population that's most vulnerable to religion, and we know what that is, right? In other words, the need for it. But it turns out that it's indoctrination that causes it, and though it is true that people will leave it for personality differences, right? Like we're talking about, but that the people who stay in it appears to be largely the degree of indoctrination means habituation. Now I forgot the question I was asking, Luke. I push back because what percent of the population? So here's where I'm here. Here's me trying to solve the problem my way and Luke trying to solve the problem his, right? And I think this is the question of religion versus state. This is how I see it. All right. And so I see basically a secular moral. You would call it some people call it a philosophy that Luke's trying to put out there. I would say the border philosophy and philosophy is a bridge between religion, which is intuition development, and reason, right? And science, evidence, right? It's the verbal bridge. And so I'm like, I think there's a need for a religion, and I think that religion should be the responsibility, like Luke is saying. And I like Luke's position, which is the modern position, better than the Stoic position. The Stoic position says I'm only responsible for X. Luke's position is I'm responsible in the Aryan tradition for more. Right? And that if I am competent, and in other words, I have my basic, what do you call them? Your
core human competence.
Core human competencies, that is how I will get mindfulness with which to deal with the world. And I think he's right. Right. It's not that I think he's right. It's that I know he's right, but I can't be that arrogant all the time. I'm saying, well, that's true if you can normalize the institutionalization of those behaviors, right? I mean, you just want to normalize them. How do you normalize? Well, then I look at the state, I say, well, I want to prohibit the alternative. Right? And that makes room for the requirement of these, right? And then you have, okay, well, is this come about by indoctrination? In other words, do we train people like we physically train them? Do we train their intuition, which is what we're talking about, which is producing mindfulness, just like we're producing physical fitness. We produce intuition, or basically emotional fitness, just like we produce rational fitness, right? I mean, we can produce all three of these fitnesses if we want to. So my view is you have to do both directions at once.
Yes.
So what I'm only trying to get at, I think I agree with that. The problem, and what I think you've done is reframe my thinking, so that I treat this is the tendency of all of us to become bad, immature. What's the word? Immature, right? We resist maturity, where maturity is merely responsibility, right? That's what agency and responsibility. Right. And that the problem in any given era of what kind of dysfunction, antisocial behavior is manifest as immaturity has to do with the amount of order that's in place. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah. Okay. And you started off talking about us as a representative sample of some segment, right? And I agree. I'd ask the question a little bit different way. To me, when I look at the different groups, right, what I'm seeing is people that are more or less sensitive to nature's pressure or the absence of nature's pressure, right? Like in our cohort, we have a lot of guys that they're going to pursue things that expose them to what nature would otherwise be exposing all of us to, right? They're looking for the training.
Sorry, say it again.
Yeah, so I don't know how far back to go. So, right. So a lot of the guys in our cohort, they pursue activities and ways of thinking, and even the work that we do. And what that does is all of those things provide a proxy for nature's pressure. So they're pursuing things that expose them to what nature would otherwise be providing to everybody, right? And so in that way, we're seeing a lot of people that are still under nature's pressure. And there's also each of us has a different sensitivity to nature's pressure. Like some of us can get by fine without being exposed to nature's pressure, right? We're just predisposed. Our temperament is that, which we're just not that sensitive to those disruptions or to those pressures from the environment. I don't think that's true for most. Right, exactly. And we see people pursuing things, the ones that do like it, we see them pursuing things that put them in greater proximity to nature's pressure, right? That's a lot of the military and stuff like that is a lot of exposure to what nature would be doing to us if we didn't have all these institutions around us, right? And so when I'm looking at the population, it's the same way same thing you're seeing it. I'm just seeing it from the other side of it. It's like these people that aren't doing those things, they're in an environment that isn't providing what's required to fully develop a human being.
Yes.
And so what I'm looking at is how do we provide those pressures?
Given that civilization is the means by which we distance ourselves from the pressures of nature, how do we retain those institutions that make us live within the constraints of nature, that have made possible the civilization,
Right, exactly.
the opportunity to fuck it up.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, we want a state whose purpose is to render itself as unnecessary as possible.
Yes.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. And so the only
Wait a
reason
minute, did you just talk about anti-communism? That's what you're talking about. You're talking about anti-communism, the opposite pole of communism. We've rendered the state invaluable because everyone's sufficiently competent that they don't need the policing.
Right. And that's really the crux of everything of my observation here, is that what we're measuring is we're measuring humans in a state of artificial immaturity.
Yes.
And I just want to caution us against using that as a baseline for human measurement.
Yeah, you're very smart.
Because I mean, we humans, you know, I know there's not a fixed number yet, but we existed for a long time before we had most of these institutions. We were just bound by nature's pressure for a long time, long before we had, you know, before we started building any of what looks like culture today.
So Luke, I sort of put how I see your work in context.
Yeah.
Context. Did that make sense to you?
Yes.
Yes. How does that make you feel? Number one. And number two is, why did we go through so many people that want to be you and all of them failed? Now, I'm not trying to blow smoke up your ass, right?
Oh, no.
Because I know that if I did, I'll just get slammed. So, but I mean,
I just happen to be broken in all the right ways to fit into that slot.
Humility. I think it's, you know, we live in a place and time. We live at a place and time where it's possible to solve the problem finally. You know, the problem's both obvious enough and we've learned enough to be able to solve it.
And I think that's the key is we live in a place and time where we can finally see the problem clearly enough, because they're always solvable.
You know why? You're not mad.
We see them clear enough or not.
You're not mad. You want to help. It's a via positiva. You want to help people.
We're too old to be mad.
Well, I'm just trying to. So I've probably talked to. I mean, there's a lot of people with ambitions, right? And is it just seem like we just stumble into this shit, right? We're just trying to solve a problem.
Well, one of the things that for me, this is a personal thing, right? So just so the audience knows, and so you guys know, it started off as a weakness, right? So I don't know if you guys know, or if the audience knows, my first child was born when I just turned 17, right? High school girlfriend. She's my wife now. It's all worked out great, right? But it was an issue at the time, a problem at the time, stupid decision making.
So you were getting tail young.
Winters are long.
Okay, no. Let's just congratulate you for getting tail young.
Winters are long.
Do you have any pictures of yourself at 17? I'd kill for one of those.
Yeah, I could dig some of those up somewhere, right? But so. And I make no claims, especially at that age. I was not good at being a parent in any way, shape, or form. I was still a child myself, right? I was an imbecile in every way you can think of being an imbecile. But what it means is I have never been an adult without a child. Ever. Most people don't have that experience. Part of the reason I went into the military was so that I could be sending money home on a regular basis, so that I could participate in being responsible for that.
I've never been an adult without a company.
Right.
It's the same fucking problem.
Well, but in a lot of ways, we've all done similar things. Brandon, the dog business was a family business, right?
Well, I had a welding business. My family business is welding, but
right.
The dogs is my business. Yeah.
Right. And I grew up with family business too, right? So that puts you in a position of responsibility far earlier than the family business does that you would otherwise be in. Yes. So in a lot of ways, we're coming to a lot of this stuff from very early exposure to being responsible for others and being responsible for things external to ourselves and things like that, right? So it changes your frame.
I see it as a very easy meaning high school through college it's just an infantilization track,
Yeah,
and you
it's
just
fucking
suck it right out of the middle there and stuff you into where you're supposed to be working at 12 roughly and see how you do. You'll do better because there's not time to just be a child here. We can steward innocence, not
I
immaturity.
started working
Yes,
for
yes,
my
I
dad
love that.
when I was 7. I can't remember, it was like 50 cents an hour or so. I mean, it was
Yeah.
it was stupid shit, like
Yeah.
sweeping floors.
Yep.
Which in a florist and garden center, you gotta understand, that's like sweeping floors, and it basically means everything's constantly being thrown on the floor.
Yeah.
Right. And you're like filling these coffin-sized boxes that live plants come in with refuse, like, for hours. And then you
Right.
water plants and sell Christmas trees, and anyway, by the way, using your kids to sell Christmas trees, man, I was fucking good at selling Christmas. Because everybody believes you're cute. It's fucking awesome.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's important. I think that's more important. I think I agree that we do school really badly. The only thing I can't figure out is how to do the equivalent of sports without school, and the equivalent of indoctrination without school. In other words, mindfulness, fitness, reading, writing, arithmetic, that kind of stuff, logic, grammar, rhetoric. I just don't, because those are training, right? Mm-hmm. And there's training that's valuable in one concept, but that's not. But we need to separate the training from the socialization, which needs to be real world, right? I mean, and employment is the best way to get it. So, I mean, I guess it's just. He said, my mother told me I was born 80. And I was working, I loved working. I had money.
Well, that's that's the other side, full accounting again, right? That's the other side of all these part-time jobs that they're trying to make careers out of these days. Those part of the compensation in those jobs was the socialization, was the learning how to be responsible. I mean, that was part of the compensation for these part-time jobs that we put high school kids into.
Supposed to be minimum on purpose, so that you get out of the fucking job.
Right.
All right. So where did we take that? I was going to tease Martin now. So Martin, we've heard us talk about all this responsibility, but from your standpoint, you more like had an epiphany. You like went through a what the fuck is going on phase, right? Is that how you describe it?
Exactly.
Yes. So what made you go through, what's important is that you can do it on your own if you have an epiphany, whereas those of us who were born into it basically didn't, right? Or circumstanced into it. So what caused you to have that epiphany? I know you've told the story before, but
well, I was a lefty at that point, and I had pretty weird ideas about man and woman and relationships. And at that point, I sort of stole a relationship from my best friend. And that relationship failed soon after. And I started thinking about my worldview. And I was watching Peterson at the time. So
and you were what at the time?
I watched Peterson. And I started to re-examine everything I believed. And I never really stopped.
So, okay, you're actually fucking devastatingly good at this. But so the question is, what does it take for you to question your beliefs? In other words, what kind of person can question his or her beliefs? Or is it that you need a circumstance and anyone can?
Obviously, I have the right prerequisites. I'm very systematizing.
Yes,
I'm pretty intelligent, if I can say so myself.
yes. I'll say so if you don't. But you say you're not, you have low conscientiousness, is that what you say?
Yes.
What is your agreeableness?
I don't like being mean to people, but
Yes.
I'll stand for truth.
Right.
I'll tell them when I disagree.
Yes. Well, you tell them when you disagree. That's the test, right?
I'll be nice about it usually.
You're
until
nice
I
to
can
me,
be.
and you seem to care, which is kind of interesting. When you correct me, sometimes harshly, you seem to be care that you've been you've corrected.
I think they break out compassion and politeness into
Yeah, I think
separate categories.
they do politeness.
I mean, when it's just text, it doesn't incentivize so much niceness.
I have really low agreeableness, but I don't like being rude to people.
I have low politeness and high compassion, so I enjoy being rude to people. If it's for their own good. Only caveat on it.
I would say I don't mind killing people, doesn't bother me at all, but I don't really like to offend or hurt them or offend them. So, anyway,
Exhaustive forgiveness, right?
I don't like human suffering at all. I mean, it really bothers me. It's like one of the reasons I can't travel to poor countries anymore. It just upsets me too much because I can't fix it. So I don't know what that's called, but just can't do it. There's places in this world that are really beautiful, but they have incredibly poor. Although the degree that's changed from my sort of beginning travel in the 80s to today, that's 80s, 90s, aughts, 10s, 20 to 40 years. I mean, shit, man. The degree to which poverty has changed in my adulthood is utterly fucking amazing. Likewise, the degree England has gone to shit in my lifetime is my adulthood. Holy crap!
Just a different kind of poverty. We've not gotten rid of it. We've just changed its form.
Yeah. All right. So, have we? That turned out. I knew that was going to be a great topic. So we did talk about. I need to frame it as the immature or infantilized female and infantilized male, and treat the mature male and female. Okay, let's test that. If we test the mature male versus mature female, we will still find a difference.
Yes.
Right. So is that
can't be compatible otherwise?
Right. Well, of course.
I see where the difference is. That women just cannot see so far into the future, so they can only be responsible within that time frame they can see.
So
that's the point I was making in the chat the other day. Was a woman that's investing, her resources for retirement, 20,000 years ago, was killing her children, literally, because she was taking those resources away from their development. So it makes absolutely perfect sense that we evolved that way, right?
I thought that was the. Oh shit! I had it. Damn it! It was almost there. So Martin, what did you say? It's they just can't predict. So it's a matter of the difference in what we have with the maturity is a difference in what we're capable of being responsible for, not a difference in what we're willing to be responsible for or desirous of responsible for. Yep. Right. So that's
I think the difference in that men tend to be more responsible is an environmental effect that men that aren't responsible for something usually have no value,
They have no,
whereas women have inherent value.
yes.
As mothers.
Well,
Well, not
To
just
clarify.
the purpose is for them to be a mother, but yeah.
I can't tell that story.
I'm glad you held that one
Well,
back.
But even from that perspective, though, we're driven to pursue each other's responsibility, right? Even at a
That's
biological
interesting.
level.
Wait a minute. That's fucking good. So, that's actually important. Why don't you cover that a little bit?
Yeah. So, well, clearly we were talking about sex, right? So that's clear for everybody, right? But there's a biological drive for that, right? There's
You
a thing
must
that
have been.
makes that-
I was thinking about love and kisses.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yep. But okay, so those are the same thing. It's the same biological drive, right? So the biological drive there is driven towards the aim of their responsibility. You know, the man is pursuing the potential of the woman's responsibility in reproduction. The woman is pursuing the male's potential for responsibility.
Yeah, no,
status.
I understand what you're saying. You need to say it. That's not the woman is pursuing. I don't get it. I know what you're trying to say, and it's not coming across. Can you try it again? If you just walk through it, maybe it'll trigger something.
Yeah. From the female perspective, right? What makes a man appealing to a woman?
Provisioning.
Right. Which is him being responsible.
Yes.
So she's pursuing his capacity for responsibility.
He's pursuing him for his capacity of
Right.
response. Okay, yes. Okay. Got it. And
Right.
he is pursuing her for
The production of children is the biological drive, right? Reproduction, which is her potential for capacity for potential for responsibility.
I think a lot of people aren't in any way aware like that should be the motivation, that they're motivated directly by sex and children.
Well, that's the same thing. What he's saying is that's the same thing. You have the instinct.
Yeah, but
you have the instinct whether it manifests or not.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference whether your drive is for actually having children or for sex when contraception is available.
I don't think that's. I mean, what he's saying is human instinct is to X. Now, so if human instinct is to for female is to obtain what I think of as status, but as you're saying is really his responsibility, right? And he's seeking her responsibility. Now, her responsibility, which is offspring, he may not have to think about that as other than the impulse to have sex. She may not have to think about it other than her impulse to have sex, right? I mean, in other words, getting close to. This is the same phenomenon expressed for both. Since I just like the framing of because whenever we can tie it back to responsibility, now we have a universal standard of measure for all the behavior.
The impulse is aimed at the father and the mother, not at the man and the woman, is what I'm getting at there, because it's aimed at that responsibility.
Is that true? I think the father and the mother are the expression of responsibility, unless you just mean I've fucked 5 women and given them a bunch of children, and now she's responsible for them, and she's fucked me and she got favors in return. So I don't know.
That may be a biological contributor, but that's not a father extending responsibility onto his.
Right. So what I'm saying again is that I don't want to conflate the instincts with what we consider maturity. In other words, the instinct is what it is. The culmination of that instinct is the maturity or the responsibility that results, right? I mean,
But I also think Martin was correct. You know, as soon as contraception is in there, that removes one of nature's pressure. The contraception does.
I mean, I just want to generally make a distinction between instinct for X and instinct for I that's evolved for purpose of X.
yes.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah.
And we can have an environment that drives the two apart, and now we have a problem.
Yes.
It's like eating all the available sugar would have been very useful at one point.
Yes.
Now it's a problem.
And that's what I've been trying to point out when I'm saying we're separating ourselves from nature's pressure. That's the exact separation I'm talking about. Is we have the instinct and we have the environment that fails to match or align with that instinct.
We're trying to use compatibility to drive maturation. Right now, they're using decompatibility to reduce maturation because there's no adaptive. You're not adapting to your surroundings, and that you have to adapt to things in order to integrate them. Excuse me.
We're talking here and I'm trying to keep track of the dimensions so I can write it down and how they interact. And I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to need the video now.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
I don't think I can do it off the top of my head anymore.
Well, the culture of the law that we're trying to explain to people, it's that stewarding of innocence, not immaturity. Children are innocent. They have a truth claim to making mistakes. We steward them through an immature period, forbearing for them becoming part of an inclusive society.
Right, but again, as we said, everybody pursues the greatest return at the lowest cost.
The edge of immorality. We outlaw immorality. It's irreciprocal.
Right, but I think I'm not. What I'm trying to get at is there's something wrong in here. We want to say okay, I got it. The problem is we live in a universe where we've moved from a moral to moral, like familial, traditional, to economic morality. In other words, that's what happened with the rise of the managerial state. Is it economics, or inequality, turn out to be the substitute for morality? Because the government doesn't produce intergenerational morality. It produces what it considers governmental morality.
Some shit substitute.
Or it's a shit substitute. So the problem is that that enabled the ability to claim things were good, that are not, that are consumption, right? Which enabled people to say, I'm still good, even though I'm avoiding maturity, responsibility, right? So
they've turned them into consumers, Curt.
well, a consumer does produces a lot of monetary velocity, which produces sufficient redistribution that you can pay for surpluses that you can pay for a bureaucracy, and you can redistribute to produce dysgenia, and you can by the act of your taxes, you can price out the middle and upper classes from their reproduction under this costly consumer system, leaving reproduction as the only viable option to people who don't care about capital and training of individuals. So I mean, it's just like it's a wonderfully this is the wonderfully unvirtuous cycle, which which Luke mentioned earlier. So I mean, I'm sitting here trying to background process. How would I observe this if I didn't know? The person will say, well, I just want X for me. Well, I mean, you may want that too, but do you want those of us who pay the other taxes not to pay them? because the minute you talk about it as money, they get a whole new attitude. When you talk about it as duty, which is another tax, right? Responsibility, which is duty, is just responsibility for the commons, then they're tax evaders too. So why do you sort of expect all this to have people to serve you with nothing in exchange? We should just go around. We just need to go around. We just need some. It's like, do you need brass knuckles? No, but you just need to slap. People need some slaps. And they think they're right, and it drives me crazy. Especially this is, again, these infantilized women get on and they come back at you like, well, that's evil. No, it's just all that's possible. Right? I mean, because you're saying I'm going to constrain your hyperconsumption and make you responsible, and you don't want to be. Well, I mean, it's frustrating. And you're telling me now, Luke's telling me I can't talk about it as a female thing. I got to talk about it as a infantilized female thing.
Yeah, good and evil either mean order and chaos, or it's lying.
That's really good. Say that again.
Good and evil either refer to order and chaos, or it's a form of lying, justifying something.
Is, oughtn't, should, can I disrupt the current order without being punished? No.
The famed bullshit is ought dichotomy isn't one. It turns out is ought only matters. These are only is a moral question, and that's all. But if it's a moral question, we know what ought is. So, all right. Have we done that topic? It's service. I had a lot of fun with that. Luke, is that pretty good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Mark, just think it was pretty.
Sure.
All right. Well, I haven't had anything to eat, so I'm going to go have some lunch. All right. Thank you guys. I really had a blast today. I'll try to get this up as possible, especially since it's a single topic. It'll probably get a lot of looks. All right. Thanks, guys. Love y'all.
All the love, Curt. All the love, guys.
That's it.